Hello, my name is Maureen Brennan. I'm with the Federal and State Grants Unit here at the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. We're going to take just a few minutes this afternoon to take a look at indirect costs. Let's start with a definition of what indirect costs are. They are costs that are not easily assigned to a small number of people or a specific program, but are necessary for the operation of a program. If you think about an organization that may have 300 staff persons and that are bringing on 2 additional staff because of a funded grant program, it would be very onerous to exactly calculate the costs of some of the overhead expenses that would be related to just adding those 2 staff. Indirect costs is the method, the tool by which you can recoup some of those overall expenses and attribute it to this program. So indirect costs often refer to administrative expenses, such as utilities and office space, and may even include the salaries of executive staff. Now, under the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act in Illinois, there are 4 options for charging indirect costs to state-funded grant agreements. They are through a federally approved indirect cost rate, a state-negotiated indirect cost rate, the 10% de minimis rate, or agencies may elect to charge no indirect costs to grant agreements at all. Now, if an agency has negotiated a federal indirect cost rate, that full rate might be budgeted to a state grant agreement. Once an applicant has been selected to receive a state award, the authority will ask for proof of that federal indirect cost rate. So make sure that you keep current letters from your federal cognizant agency on hand. If you are selected for an authority award, we won't ask you for that documentation as part of your grant application. Your grant monitor will ask you for that documentation during the negotiation of the agreement and before the grant agreement is executed. The state is also negotiating indirect cost rate. Some agencies have already taken this step. But as you know, because of GATA, every applicant for a state award, federal or state-funded award, must register, pre-qualify, and complete their ICQ administrative risk assessment through the GATA portal. Every agency that has completed those 3 steps will automatically receive an invitation from Crowe Horwath, the accounting firm that the state has contracted with to negotiate indirect cost rates. Crowe Horwath will automatically send the agency an invitation to submit an application for state indirect costs. Now, agencies are not required to negotiate a rate. And as a matter of fact, if an agency already has a federal rate, they may not negotiate a state rate. But we would encourage you to go to this portal and to indicate there whether you intend to negotiate a rate, use a federal rate, elect to use the 10% de minimis rate, or not charge indirect costs to your grant agreement at all. Because this is a method that the state is using, the GATA office is using, to get a sense of how many applicant agencies are availing themselves of each of the 4 options. As I said, state negotiated rates are not available to agencies that already have federal ICRs, and agencies are not required to negotiate an ICR with the state. The third option is to use the de minimis indirect cost rate of 10%. Now, grantees who include the 10% de minimis in their budgets will have to submit documentation of their what is called their modified total direct costs. That's going to be the figure, the basis upon which you will charge your indirect costs to your agreement. The modified total direct cost, the MTDC, is the basis for the calculation of all indirect costs, not just the de minimis. But those that use the de minimis rate will need to provide documentation of their MTDC if they are selected for funding. Your grant monitor will notify you how you will document that MTDC, but that's only after you are selected for funding. There are some limitations on agencies using a de minimis rate. If the agency has a current negotiated rate, either state or federal rate, they may not charge the indirect cost at the de minimis 10%. And agencies that have ever had a federal indirect cost rate may not use the de minimis rate. Just want to give you a couple of pieces of information on what is included in the MTDC. It may include direct salaries and wages, applicable fringe benefits, materials and supplies, travel, and subcontracts, but only the first $25,000 of each subcontract. MTDC excludes all equipment, capital expenditures, tuition remissions, scholarships, and fellowships, any participant support costs, and the portion of each subcontract in excess of $25,000. Let's look at a quick example. For this grant, you can see that we've got, in the first column, we've got all of their total costs that they're budgeting to this grant. Personnel, fringe benefits, travel, they didn't charge equipment, supplies, and contractual. And the contract there is $50,000. So I've created two other columns. The first one shows you which of these total expenses may be charged to MTDC, and the second shows you which are excluded from your calculation of the MDTC. You can see that the first $25,000 of the contractual costs may be included, but the second $25,000 of that $50,000 contract is excluded. So I took the total MTDC, multiplied it by the 20% indirect cost rate this agency has, and came up with $15,200 as their indirect cost. I've added that back to the first column to their total costs to get a total budget of $116,200. So that's a brief look at indirect costs. Thanks for joining us today.